Hey again, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about my fantasy RPG setting, Sundara, Dawn of a New Age. Apologies in advance. My voice is a little unusual. I'm coming off of being sick. And if you hear any weird noises going on, my building is still under construction. So I am in no immediate danger. It's just what the work crews are doing today. But since I've got you here, I figured I would take a little bit and talk about another of the Cities of Sundara installments that didn't really get that much love when it first came out. And I think that's a bit of a tragedy because it was a lot of fun putting it together, and there's a lot of really wild stuff in there that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. And that's why I wanted to get into Archbliss, the City of the Sorcerers. But before I launch into all of that, I'll just begin at the beginning because it all starts with a weird rock and a new resource. Of when I put these cities together, a lot of them have kind of their own unique cultural addition to the setting, their own weird either a metal or chemical process or some variety of magic technology that they add to the setting. And Archbliss is no different in that respect, in that what it added to the game was something I called Sorcerers quartz. It was discovered by and named by the founders of the city, and in short, it's a crystal that absorbs and stores magical energy. Whether it's to be used at a later date, kind of like a pearl of power, just put into a new spell, or if you want to take magic out of a dangerous item and render it sort of, if not harmless, then at least asleep so it can't hurt anyone. There's all sorts of weird things you can do with it, and like most magical resources in a fantasy RPG, Sorcerer's Quartz is kind of rare. So finding a lot of it in one place was very difficult and very, well, it required a lot of sorcerers to get together in one place and combine their efforts. And when all of them came together and they found this massive deposit of this stone, they sort of felt, if not entitled to it, that they shouldn't just give it away to anyone without being certain of what their motives were for it. And this led to a lot of tension as all of the various cities and city states around were looking out and they saw a bunch of people with a lot of power suddenly making a claim on a resource and being very protective of it. And tensions flared, things started to get very Cold War, almost very hot war, until eventually enough sorcerers sort of combined their efforts and they took this very large chunk of the earth that had a majority of the sorcerer's quartz in the setting sort of buried in it and used their combined power to sort of tear it out of the earth and float it into the air. And thus was born Archbliss, the City of the Sorcerers. And that story happened probably 2,000 years ago at this point in the setting. And in all of that time, the sorcerers have been building, expanding, changing their flying city, and they've been recruiting. Now, there's lots of people throughout the setting, whether it's people who aren't entirely sure of their family lineage, whether it's people who were exposed to strange holes in reality, people who have survived dangerous rituals, who have just wound up with a sorcerer's bloodline and they have no idea how to control it, they have no idea what to do with it. And when that happens, a lot of the time people will go to Archbliss and they will ask, take me in, I am a sorcerer, can someone train me? And so it's sort of become like a very large version of Xavier's School for gifted youngsters. But there's more to it than just a cool floating city of magic. And if you just want to use it for that, that's plenty for the setting. But there's a couple of other things buried inside this particular location that I think are fun. And this is when we get into both the economy of Archbliss, which is weird, and the needs of this particular city as a place so far above, literally and metaphorically, the rest of the world. And one of the things to keep in mind when thinking about Archbliss, and it's one of the fun exercises that I think it provides both for game masters and for players, is that in Archbliss, the normal economies of the world are stood on their head. Of most of the places you go, people will trade gold, silver, mithril, things of that nature because they're inherently valuable metals, and they'll trade them in coin, they'll trade them in bulk, whatever have you. In Archbliss, those things are considered worthless. There's an entire district of the city that is built on transmutation. Any normal metal, any normal material, snap of your fingers, you can have it. And it sort of rendered a lot of things all the way down to, well, not even just trade, but down to barter. Of you have people coming there and trying to sell things that in other parts of the setting would be worthless or next to worthless. A fresh apple, whether it's seeds for a certain plant, even something as unusual as the blood of a particular animal. In Archbliss, these things can be very, very valuable because it's hard to get that kind of stuff up here unless you're willing to expend the magical capital. And so you can have that kind of challenge of not just how do I pay for my inn for the night, or what do I do with these particular bits of loot and treasure that are now worthless, but it's figuring out what it is the sorcerers want. What are they willing to take in trade for you? And then there's the reverse of it, of amongst the sorcerers, things that are astonishingly powerful items, things that are wondrous creations anywhere else in the setting. Up here, this is Tuesday. Everyone has one of these. You don't have one, they'll just give it to you. It's practically valueless. And I think that's a fun thing you can do, both as a player and a game master, if you want to play someone from Archbliss who just doesn't understand how the economy works. Or if you want to play someone who is so focused on standard wealth that once they're in a place that no one cares about money, it can kind of leave them floundering. And that's engaging. But there is another part of it, and it's something that I think plays into the setting on a larger scale, and it's something I would very much like to expand on, both in modules and even in a full campaign if there's enough interest in the setting. But I've danced around it, so I'll get to the point. And it's generally that Archbliss as a place seems wondrous, and it is. There's impossible things that can be done there. There's people that can trade services who can teach you things that you cannot learn anywhere else in Sundara. But there is a very dark shadow in Archbliss, and it's kind of unique amongst the releases that have come out so far. It is the only city that has a distinct villain-coded aspect to it, and that villain-coded aspect is it's the only place thus far in the setting that has a standard aristocracy for how its government is run. Of the noble houses of Archbliss may not be based on straight bloodlines the way we expect, like this, the father and the mother and their children and their cousins and the aunts and the uncles, and this makes up the noble house. It's based on who has the powers of what bloodline, but because it's less controlled and has a more potent aspect to it, there are some very, very dark angles as to what people will do to not only join but maintain their power as part of that structure. And that's when we get into things like fantasy eugenics, and that can lead to all sorts of very shady plots, especially if someone is considered key to a future position. But in addition to that, there's the problem that comes with hoarding resources, that comes with the idea of privilege and who should have to work for things. A good example of this is when Archbliss was formed, it was formed by all of the sorcerers working together, whether it was great or small, learned or newly minted. All the sorcerers came together, and that was part of the reason the city managed to do this impossible thing. But as the years have gone on and the laws have become more codified and the noble houses have come to exist, and now it's a question of who expends the spell slots in order to get things done for the day. Because theoretically, if everyone were to combine all of their magic, all of their energies, Archbliss could float forever. It could maintain all of its power. It could continue doing these amazing things. But the people with the most power are often the ones who are in high positions of nobility, and they're not going to spend all day, every day, sacrificing their magic, their power, their position to help the commoners. But then there's the question of how many sorcerers do you need actively working to maintain the city? How much magic does it take to keep this place running? And if you're not providing it, what are you doing to maintain it? Because if it falls beneath a certain threshold, it is very possible the city will come tumbling out of the sky, and that's going to be bad for everybody living in it. It's also going to be bad for anyone under it, anyone trying to travel to it, anyone who sort of depends on it to maintain, both for their livelihoods, their political alliances, all of the things that Archbliss helps keep run. If it tumbles, there's going to be a very large power vacuum. And then you have the question of, well, do you attempt to reform it? Do you bring out these facts to people so that they know what's going on? There's all sorts of directions one could go with that if they really wanted to. And it's sort of why I think it should be expanded on. There's a lot of potential there. But, as with everything else in the setting, which potential gets explored depends on what people are willing to pursue. What do you want to see more of? And so that's what I'd like to ask you all. Tell me in the comments below, whether you're new to the setting, new to the channel, what would you like to see more of in Sundara going forward, and what would you like to see me talk about more of in these videos? Do you want to hear about more locations? Do you want to hear about more creatures? Do you want me to talk about what I did with some of the fantasy species? Would you like more spells, more classes? What do you want to see? Whatever it is, I am here. I am listening to you. So, till next time, happy gaming, everybody.